All right, cool. So blessings, everyone. I'm David, Soulfish. I appreciate you being here. So I have a really special person I want to introduce you to that I've recently met. I found her work online, and I found what she had to say, very straightforward, very honest, very genuine. And so I asked her, I said, hey, would you like to hang out with me and talk about some empath stuff, some energy things? And believe it or not, she said yes. I hadn't scared her off from previous videos yet. So that was great. And so here we are. So this is Kristin. And Kristin, I'd love you to say howdy and explain your wonderfulness.
Well, I don't think we have that much time today to explain all that wonderfulness. No, but thank you so much for inviting me. And yeah, this is just perfect timing. So I'm an intuitive, also an empath, which is what kind of brought David and I together. And I work with people one-on-one to help them transition through pretty much doing shadow work, like through difficult things so that they can live their life purpose. You know, all my sensitive folks that feel like they're kind of caught in that loop where they can't really move forward, and that's when they come see me. So I help them move forward and move on through their, you know, into their like life purpose, which is really a pleasure for me. I also do energetic forecasts and tarot readings on a Facebook group, and I have a YouTube channel that is growing. And so yeah, I just love to share my spiritual journey with people and what I've learned and help them personally develop and grow. So that's kind of what I'm all about. Yeah.
Yeah, right on. Well, and that's why, that's why I reached out to you, because I felt that, and the cool part was I thought, we already mentioned this together, but I thought, this is cool because she has a really soft way of saying some of the things that I say maybe in a little more direct way. So I thought, this is such a great balance and a different perspective, same bucket, but a different angle and a different level of understanding and different strengths, and all of that being put together, I think could really, help a lot of folks, which is why we wanted to come together and share some of our thoughts and ideas and practice, right? And see if that's helpful for folks and get their feedback on that. So we'll ask a few questions to everyone as we go through the video, but I think you and I really wanted to start with, as empaths, well, I guess the great question, Kristin, is that, when was the big moment for you? When was the big aha moment when you said, holy moly, there's actually a name to this and I'm not broken, What was that?
Yeah, well, I'll start a little bit before that just to give context. Like, I had pretty much no pulse on the spiritual world outside of the religion I was raised in for, the first about 30 years of my life. And I actually kind of like tripped, stumbled, and like woke up, not meaning to, it was not like something I'd been reading like the Tao Te Ching or whatever, I don't know, the Bhagavad Gita for years, and then it happened. So everything at that point, that was 10 years ago. I'm coming up on my anniversary in like a few months. That was 10 years ago. And everything up until that point was just like, it was all just intuition, and kind of, I always felt connected to this thing I would call God, and before then I would tell like my ex-partner, I remember always talking about this, and I was like, I feel like I have a basketball size heart sewn on the outside of my chest. Those were the words I had for it, because I had no connection to like anything spiritual that outside of, again, religion. Mm-hmm. And there was no verbiage for it. So that's how I felt, and that was the best way I could describe it. It was like, I just felt so sensitive, and so like my heart center was just like big and completely exposed. And so it was about a year after that spiritual awakening where, and I'm sure a lot of you will relate to this, as you start to like awaken and your point of attraction shifts, synchronicities started happening, and my whole friend group shifted overnight. And I started to attract people in my life that would give like words and context to things. And one of these women who became my friend, she was several years older than me and was a yoga instructor as well at the time. I taught yoga at the time. And I was telling her about my experiences, and she just casually looked at me and said, oh, you're an empath. And I didn't, I was like, what's an empath? And that started it. And even at that point, I'm not sure if you even did a like Google search, if that much would have come up. So a lot of the beginnings was stumbling around. She didn't, I don't think even at the time she identified as an empath. She had just heard that term, recognized it, had been in the spiritual community enough, and lo and behold, that's how I first heard those words. Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, dude. It's funny because about 10 years ago, similar thing, you know. So it's funny, you know, the synchronicity and how a group of people I found, and I wonder if you see this too, but it's interesting how groups of people that run across your path, and I'm not talking about necessarily your direct friends or family, but just some people maybe like, you know, like the comet, right? That just kind of is in your path for a little while and then is gone, you know, that person, right? But you know, these way showers, right? That show up and then are gone, but left an impression enough for you to kind of change gears, you know? Totally. And I think that's the mission of us all in some ways, right? It's the small moments. The moment you talk to that dude in the elevator and, you know, they were upset or something and you were able to kind of assuage some of their issues somehow, right? In just a 2-minute conversation between floors, and you have no idea the effect, right, that had on that person. And it wasn't your intention. You didn't get on an elevator and say, let me share some light today. You just were you, right? Just being you. So amazing that person was there for you at the right time, at the right moment, right? Well,
Yeah.
not amazing really, right?
Right. Yeah, we use these words, but like it's all, you know, seems very orchestrated on some other level. But yeah, you just have to be willing to, I think, pick up the breadcrumbs when they're laid before you, and it's there. So yeah, how about you? How did you find out about the great world of empath?
So, I had this sign occur, like this vision. It was a waking dream, and it was a vision. And you know, I remember as a kid feeling everything from everyone, and I suppressed it. I had these visions as a kid of things to come, and I'm, you know, 49, so you know, I'm seeing visions of things that I didn't grow up with movies wise, you know, as a kid. So it was very interesting, but I suppressed all this stuff. So in my later years, when I was around 35-ish, give or take, or whatever, I saw this sign, 35, 38, and I saw this sign, and it just changed my entire life. It was really weird. It was just a symbol, and there was all this kind of energy wrapped up in it, and it was almost like somebody, you know, it was like all this suppression, everything that I had kind of locked down just kind of came out, and my gifts got even more so. And it got to the point. So I sold all our stuff, closed down other companies. We moved off into the mountains of Asheville, and I stayed there for 7 years and just hibernated like a monk and studied and tried to understand my gifts and what, you know, I knew something had happened. I didn't understand my gifts at the time. I didn't understand I was an empath. Nobody talked about empath 10, 12 years ago. That was a new word, you know. It wasn't a, now it's thrown around. Every other person's an empath when they're not, you know what I'm saying? And it was a different place. So uh it was a very strange, obviously life altering experience. And then after that period of time, Nance started making me teach folks, because I was really reticent for that. Still reticent, even with YouTube in some ways and other things to be out there. But um, you know, but there was a calling, there's a pull, there's, you know, everything you and I are talking about is electromagnetic, and there was this, you know, there was this pull, this understanding, and so here we are, you know, after a lot of you know, a lot of mileage, right? A lot of mileage. So really, that's why I look like I'm 95 when I'm really, no, but this it's a lot of mileage, you know, and it's everybody carries that mileage, right? So it's not, I'm not like say, oh, woe is me. It's not like I've had a crummy life in that way or anything, but it's more of like, you know, everybody's got that path to walk, right? But the problem as an empath is that more than likely at some point in your childhood, when the incongruence of what you're hearing people say and what you're feeling the truth out of those people create a lot of trust issues, create a lot of, you suppress that in you because you can't function, because every time you're talking to somebody, there's a lie going on in some way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's so tough.
And so right, so you suppress that, and then all of a sudden, for a lot of folks, you know, me included, but later at whatever time, and that could be a year-long break you got where you were sleepwalking for a while and your gifts were suppressed, or it could be later, but you wake up and then all of a sudden you remember, right? You feel again all the pain and all these things that you had suppressed down that you didn't want to feel anymore for whatever reason with your limited kid understanding. And now as an adult with some experience, you're able to start to say, wait a minute, this is crazy stuff going on, right? That you couldn't articulate back then, particularly when everyone around you is saying different things, but you're feeling what the real picture is,
Yeah.
right? And we wake up to that. And here we are. And then, and you and I work with a lot of folks where, there's a real incongruence. That's a real change in your worldview to realize that you're tapped in, right? So, what was your big number one, and what do you think with all the folks that you work with too? Like, what do you think is the big downer, the number one like thing that slaps you in the face or whatever that you feel like, empaths or highly sensitive folks, what do you think is the number one, gotcha, you know?
Oh, what do you mean by gotcha?
Like you're, the number one kind of like, I have a real problem with the victimization that being an empath and an energy sensitive automatically you somehow you yourself automatically takes you there at first, and a lot of people wake up to that and feel like overwhelmed. They can't respond, aren't comfortable to take the first next step. I mean, what do you think the number one thing is to help somebody? I don't want to say wake up to that, but like, you know, here's your first big problem. Here's a way to start thinking about that first big problem that you're running into, kind of a thing. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, what a big question too. It does make
That's a
sense.
big one. Yeah.
Yeah,
That was
real,
that was a big open-ended. That was a big
yeah. So
giant.
let's take that and chunk it down and dissect it and come back around and find
Yeah.
different ways to answer it, because that one is like a really big question. And I have some different answers for it. And I think the first thing that I feel pretty passionate about talking about today is the fact that I mean, I think we'd even have to like define what an empath is and what, so, maybe we can even talk about like what your
Yeah. Let's
definition
do
is
that.
and my, like to break it down, because I think like what I said to you is like we're in the wild, wild west of spirituality. There's not these understandable, like definable terms. So what one person might be calling an empath, I'm not sure if I would call it that, or I might have a different approach to it. So I think before we talk about something, we kind of have to say, so in the most concise but articulated way, like what would you say that an empath is? Like what is that thing we're talking about?
Hmm. I think, from my understanding and studies and personal experience, I think I would wrap it up into this kind of a burrito. It'd be like an energy sensitive is able to is able to sense other people's, other things, other places energy fields, um, because everything is molecular. Everything is about an energy flow, a breath, an inhale and exhale. It's you're feeling the energy and emotions of what's around you as an empath. With that means that sometimes I can feel inside you. For some people, they can't feel inside another, but they can. They're very good. Now we're not talking about mediums. We're not talking about talking to dead people. We're not. I'm not going into to that side of things. I'm going to keep it here in the material world for a second. And when you think about it, we're able to feel the energy fields of places, people, things. It's a psychic ability when you're able to tap into other people, other, I'm gonna say other animate objects, other sentient beings. So, so from my perspective, understanding that and understanding that also as an empath, your function is cleaning. You are as you and a broadcaster. So you take this energy in, and it's up to you with practice to transmute it, to turn it into something else. If you don't, which is what happens to us as empaths, then you start to build a story around it, and you say, "Hey, man, this is my stuff," or you start to respond to the world based on the vibe that you're feeling. So, for example, if you're on a scale of 0 to 5, 5 being awesome, and a scale of 0 to -5, -5 being you off yourself and leave a crater. So you feel those kind of polar feelings, right? And if you look at it like that and you say, hey, I'm a one, and you're going through life as a one, well, then, the 3 and 4 things in life to you are not, you're not going to attract those. You're not going to be in that space, right? And that's an electromagnetic function. If so, so for the definition, I'm not giving you the Wikipedia version. I think of the Wikipedia version. I wish I would read it right now for you. I think they call it a fictional. They say something fictional about it, like this is like a fantasy thing, kind of like fibromyalgia used to be considered fantasy and some other things, right? So, it's funny as science poo-poos on things when there's not money to be made in that angle, or it doesn't fit their dogmatic paradigm that keeps people in a suffering or in a control mechanism, right? But when you start to really think about spirituality, particularly as an empath, and my biggest definition, Kristin, as an empath, is that you're a seer. And what people, and I deal with a lot of people who are saying, I don't want to see the negative. I want to stay in the light. It'll bring me down. If I go down, then I'm not a one anymore. I'm a negative one, and blah, blah, blah. But that's the point of your practice. And you're not supposed to hide from the shadow. You're supposed to be light to the shadow. And that's through transmutation, right? Practical alchemy. We're talking about real spiritual work here. We're talking about a practical approach to your beingness.
Yeah,
so
you're speaking my language right there with
right?
all that. Yeah, I mean, you said that I have a soft approach, which is true, but I kind of like softly, gently lure you into your shadow. Like, hey, let's look at this stuff and like, let's, because
Right
you
on.
can't, like you can't really be in the light by suppressing the dark. That's not how it works. But yeah, so I'm loving what you're saying. That's my jam right there.
Yeah, and my job is to shake people up. My job is to, that's that shaman side of me where I need to bring out what's troubling you so that you have to face it. um, and I think that's the basis, to be honest, of we often operate in an opposing force, right? So you say to yourself, well, my childhood sucked because my parents sucked and they treated me poorly, and you think about this opposing force there, and you say, so therefore, when you're that age onwards as an adult, it crafts everything in you, and it directs, say, hey, I'm not, for most, I think it says, hey, I'm not going to be that kind of person. I'm going to do these things so that I don't do to whoever what was done to me, kind of a thing. And we see that in a lot of folks, and in that process. But from that, from that discovery, um, there's a point. There's just a point where I want to say it just doesn't matter. In other words, there's a point where, and I'm shifting this to come back, is there's a point where sometimes the why of these things, why did this happen to me? Why wasn't I told? Why? I used to think to myself, back in history, people, energy sensitives were medicine men. The medicine men were killed or trained. You weren't left to hang out there without tools in the past. You know what I'm saying? And we wake up because society has said that these things aren't important anymore. Society, and I'm not using this as like, let's poop on society. I'm saying, like, whatever the dogma, wherever you come from, in some general, it's been minimized because commerce is more important. These other worldly matters have taken, and I'm sure it's been this way forever, but I'm saying are the primary, right? And the reality is, every person I've been with at death never says to me, man, I wish I'd done that deal with Coca-Cola. They don't. They don't say, hey, man, I wish I'd bought another race car. Hey, man, I wish I'd, they all say, fuck, I wish I hadn't worked so much. I wish I had spent more time. I wish I now understand where I went wrong. I wish. And you think to yourself that you're leaving wishing for a lot of stuff that, you're just now, because you were so focused on these other things, that you're just now realizing that, what you really wanted was just what you needed, not really any more than that. And so I bring this back to the empath side, because as an empath, we want to feel these things. We want to feel connected. We want to feel connected to here. The problem is, if we were so connected to this place, you wouldn't be able to process and feel all the other stuff that you're feeling. So that's why there's this disconnect where we don't quite belong here. And yet we don't belong. We're like God's redheaded stepchildren in the spirit world, right? The spirit side doesn't really want us, and
Yeah.
yet the human side doesn't really want us either, right?
Yeah.
And
I
we
have lots of
bridge. We
opinions
bridge
on
the
this too.
gap,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I have lots of
We
thoughts
bridge
on
the
that.
Yeah, so we bridge this gap. So please, I mean, that's why I think I attracted me to you, was that your messages from an empath thing were, a, don't be a victim. I know I'm paraphrasing in a non-tactful way, but basically, don't be a victim. Here's some tools you can do so you're not a victim, and you need to change your perspective. That it's not victimhood anyway. It's a gift if you actually learn what the gift is and how to wield it. So, and that's the bottom line. And you have great teachings for that. And they're different than mine, but come from the same spirit and come from the same intent. And that's what I love so much about that. So,
Yeah, and that's what's fun about this is like I wouldn't want anyone to agree with every last thing I said and think like I think. It's like by having this dialogue, we make conversations like what I call textured. It's like you can feel instead of it just being like a flat surface, it's like now this three-dimensional thing. That you can kind of like touch, taste, and feel. It's like so
right.
that's what I'd like people to have multiple perspectives on it, because maybe my perspective isn't helpful exactly, or it gives only one side of something. So I like to add that. So that was really interesting about how you thought or what you feel like empaths are, and gives, I think, texture to this part of it. And you brought in a lot of like what you thought was like some things that empaths struggle with right now. So I mean, for me, what I think empath is a label we've given that isn't necessarily something that works beyond this realm. I think it's a real human term that we've used. Like, because what I'd like people to get away from is this thought that all the empaths are hanging out together and then they're like, okay, we're going to come down and be empaths. I don't think that's the case. Without getting too heavy into the details of it, although I think I made a video about it. I believe that around the time of the atomic bomb dropping, there was sort of this thing that echoed. I mean, human beings, I think, have always been suspect in the universe, but I think that there's been kind of a concern outside this dimension of like, all right, this could be, if we're all connected, what these human beings are about to potentially do to each other is a crisis. But with the free will choice and the I think there's a universal kind of rule of like not messing with other people's
Hmm.
choices and things like that. I forgot what the
Hmm.
term is exactly. But because of that, from an outside perspective of potential beings incarnating here, it's like, okay, what can we do that would be the most helpful to help humankind? And I honestly think that part of the direction we were heading is we could not see other as ourselves. We could not feel into each other. We were becoming desensitized to how we treated our neighbors, our spouses, our children, our other beings on the planet, that we could drop a
Hmm.
bomb like we did.
Hmm.
So I believe that the decision was, okay, if we come in with more sensitivity, it will force other people to entrain, will have to make adjustments. So as an empath, you probably feel this. You can't put a bunch of chemicals on your body or you feel like shit. Like, one of the first things when I was in 7th grade, I broke out rashes all over my body because of the detergent my mom was using, right? So we had to go free and clear before free and clear was a popular thing. My clothes never smell like anything, but at least I don't break out in rashes. So,
Right.
right? So you have to change the chemicals you put in your body. You have to change the food you put in your body. You can no longer just treat everybody like whatever you want to, right? Because you're sensitive. You're sensitive to how we treat animals. You're sensitive to how we treat children, how we treat other races, other sex. Like, you become more sensitive. It's a superpower. It is what is supposed to change the world. So that is what I think the blanket term that empath is. But on top of that, I'm very proud to be an empath, but I don't sit here most of the time being like, I'm an empath. I'm an empath. Like, honestly, I think that there's so many different versions of it. Just like I'm very proud to be a woman in this incarnation, because that choice has led me to have certain experiences that I wouldn't if I had chosen the incarnation of a man. But even though being a woman makes me relatable to other women and all the billions of women on the world, because we have something in common, it doesn't necessarily make me the same. Like, we have as many differences as we have more differences than we have things in common. I think with empaths, we do have that thing that's foundationally aligns us. But when we really break it down, we have much different purposes and different spiritual gifts. So for you, you sound like you're much more of a seer type with a psychic ability and the gift of potential prophecy and predictions. That is not in my wheelhouse. Like, is very clear that that is not, with the guides that I work with and like my own personal mission on this planet, not what I'm here to do. I consider myself at like maybe the highest level, maybe a mystic. I have a channeling ability to directly channel energy from, higher selves, other people's higher selves, mine, extra dimensional beings. Like, I can bring a lot of source energy through in a channeling sort of way, information wise. And I'm also directing people, like I can find out what's in misalignment with someone's energy and help them towards their life purpose. That's a very strong purpose of mine. So here we are, these empaths that have similarities, but our mission and our purpose is so different on top of other things that we might be. So I think that it's important for somebody to realize, oh, I'm an empath, but we also don't want to hold too tightly as an identification of who we are as like the defining thing, So that's my belief, what kind of empaths are in a basic sort of way, in a nutshell. And so if I'm going to take that and answer your first question about, what do I feel? So that goes to like which empath I'm talking to. So if we're talking, so I did a video that's become quite popular called, shameless plug. It's like the stages of empath awakening. And that was a channeled message. It was based on my experience and it felt really important. And it obviously was, because it's brought a lot of souls to eyeballs on that. And so if you're first stage, what I consider first stage, and you're just waking up to being an empath and you haven't been on a spiritual journey for very long, what things I would direct you to are going to be different than in a different stage, So, but I think, one of the first things we need to understand is, and this may be where I have that softer, like feminine, loving approach is, not that yours isn't loving, like just want to clarify, softer, loving in a different sort of way. First step for people to get out of victimhood is to recognize that they were victims. Like, to actually go towards that energy and feel it fully to move through it. Because the truth of the matter is most of us were victims. Like, we were victimized. A lot of us had severe abuse. A lot of us sensitive types came into families with abuse and a lot of issues. I think we spread out, right? We didn't get born into families where everybody else was an empath. Wouldn't that be nice? But there was a reason why we spread out, we trickled in, we infiltrated the system, right? That was more powerful. So a lot of us really did have abuse. And so my first step is to say, yeah, you probably were victimized. And you should first honor that and say, that sucked. And that wasn't okay. How I was treated wasn't okay. And for some of us, depending on the level of trauma, I would do some trauma work, like, work with someone like me. I do like soul retrieval into different aspects of like childhood wounding, because we really want to bring back those wounded child selves, come back into like wholeness. Because a lot of that stuff becomes fractured in our psyche. A lot of trauma makes a huge fracturing, and then we start to push away and disown these parts of us, and that becomes really problematic. So we have to re-own those, and make sure that we're feeling really solid and whole. If someone's really in victimhood, I say actually, then do something. Like, let's do something about it. Let's work on that trauma, because you probably were a victim. I think a lot of people, they stay in victimhood because they think they shouldn't be complaining about it. Like, it wasn't that bad. And
Mm-hmm.
so they don't do anything about it. They don't
Mm-hmm.
actually do anything to heal it, but then they stay stuck in that energy.
Mm-hmm.
So for a lot of people, that's actually one of the first steps. Now, if you've done a ton of therapy already and you feel pretty good on that end, then there's a next step, right? Because there has to be a point where we say, yes, I was a victim, but I currently am a sovereign
Mm-hmm.
being with free will choice. So it's time to put the pants on and move forward. But I find people often try to skip steps, and that keeps them stuck. So I'm just taking a
Yeah.
breath there. I know I can like,
No, that's perfect. I really appreciate what you're saying and what you're highlighting. I do think that, there's a moment, change happens over time, right? So this change happens over time, but the moment of change is the light switch, is the on off. You switch it on or off. In other words, I was this, and it may take me 5 years to get to this moment, but as soon as the switch goes, I become this. Now, it may take this cat 5 years, may take this cat 5 minutes to
right?
make that to get prepared for the ultimate flick over, right? The switch. So I feel you on that. I think what I found, and a lot of the folks that I work with, I think I've experienced as well, is that a lot of focus on you know on the ailment, a lot of focus on the symptom, a lot of focus on the ailment. I find that, and that's where I think there's some parallels with what we're saying on, once you've decided that you're done being a victim, right? Because it's a feeling. You ultimately feel like whatever I do now is better than what it is right now. I can do anything because my fear of out there, the unknown, is less than my fear of staying the same. That's the moment of change. And when that happens, and they make that decision, that's when you get into your second step of, okay, time to put some pants on now, because we got through that stage. And now let's get some real work done on this other angle, because it's about transmuting that. Now you weren't designed to be here. it, the place, this world may poop on us, may try to bring the vibe down, right? But our job is to take what's going on around us and it not affect us in the same way. If we bring up any of the masters, think about it. Think about from a Jesus perspective of when he says something like turn the other cheek. When you think about that and you say, the I'm gonna say the non-empath version of that is like, somebody hits you and you're just not going to hit them back. You just do one of these things. It's like almost an action. It's like an act, right? It's like a mental act. Kristin hits me. I mentally choose, wait a minute, I'm not going to hit her back, right? But there's a big difference when you're coming from here, being driven, than when Kristin hits me and yet I don't feel hate, anger, anything for you other than love and understanding and feeling that you have pain. And that, so imagine the ability to separate yourself from the physical repercussions of what you're feeling. And what is that? That's the mastery side of things. So often we say, here's the problem. And I want to give you a math equation. I just want to bear with everyone for a minute, but for Kristin, for what you said, for you to understand where my head is at, is like, so we see a problem, right? I want to go back to my negatives and pluses for a minute. But if you see a problem and you say, oh, I witnessed this problem and that's a -3, right? So there's this -3 there. And then we know that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Okay. So what we do in trying to affect a positive change, and I'm using this because this is what empaths do and fail at, and then this brings on more issues. But they say, okay, I feel this -3. So you interject yourself in there thinking that if I add this +3 in there, I'll nullify it, right? And then that'll be good. But the problem is that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That's science. So Newton, what the science we study, Newton was an alchemist. Newton was talking about a lot of how energy worked. It wasn't, and so these became our natural laws of science, but these were esoteric teachings that he brought out and kind of exhibited in this way. It's not just so happens, it happens that the universe works this way. So, and that he was able to articulate it in a way from esoteric teachings. So when we look at this and say there's an equal and opposite reaction, if you see a -3 and you add a +3, you are automatically also adding a -3. to it. So you're still left with your -3. Nothing changed. You just interjected. It's like putting your hand in wet sand and taking it out. So for the minute there was a divot, but soon you weren't there. It's exactly how it was before you touched it, right? And that's a huge thing with empaths. And I thought I wanted to get your perspective on that because that ties into what we were just saying. Once you figured out kind of like, okay, I got pwned in this way. Ultimately, there's stuff that's mine, there's stuff that's theirs, and there's circumstance, right? There's just you were part of a life picture, and you weren't the object. It was just something else. So you admit to what was yours. You've now recognized what was theirs in circumstance, and then you're in second stage now, and you're able to start to really look at this, and you're feeling these things. What do you think? I mean, this is kind of wrapping it up in towards that angle. What's your spin on that?
Like, what's the second stage?
The implication, I guess, and what I find with a lot of the empaths, I work with a lot of people who probably aren't in the one-on-one stage. You know what I'm saying? I'm working with
Yeah.
people who've suffered for a little bit and who've tried a couple of things and realizing that it was BS, realizing that practice doesn't make sense, that methodology doesn't make sense, it's not applicable. What's a real methodology? This stuff has been taught for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, Kristin. That's what I teach. This stuff has been around longer than Christianity, longer than other religions. This stuff has been taught and taught and taught and been hidden because there's a spark within us that's available to all of us. And we tap it out. Many of us tap it out in the process of being here. A few of us, as a percentage, I'm saying, like a tenth. In the Tao, I think it says 3 out of the 10 people are for the good, which means they're for the bad. 3 out of 10 are for the bad, which means they're for the bad. And one dude, and one dude, 3 out of 10 are sleepwalking. And then there's one dude walking around seeking. And you think to yourself, man, that's the Tao. And that's several thousand years old. Man, haven't we evolved at all? Like, holy moly, there's no change here.
Haven't you realized
the difference is
human
we have
beings
TV.
evolve really, really, really slowly?
Yeah, right? We're like in
For the most part,
I mean,
as a whole.
can you imagine interdimensionally and the aliens? They just got to be like, fuck, like thousands of years. When's this shit gonna get better?
I don't know. I have a feeling they all had to do their like millennia of evolution as well, so they're having some sensitivity for us. That's the way I like to think about it. But
Well, that's definitely the positive spin for that. For holy moly! But I gotta, But as an empath, think about it. Like you think about these moments and how you felt something, and in that it wasn't an accurate feeling necessarily, or an accurate estimation of your environment with your feeling in that, and gets compounded as well with all of this other stuff. I mean, Kristin, when we're talking about when you talk about really from an empath perspective, and we get out of the victimization role and you're getting into, okay, what can I do right now to feel better? One of my suggestions to folks is always, hey, you need to take the most low-hanging fruit that is around you right now that brings you dis-ease. And anything. If you know that I love donuts, if you know eating a donut doesn't work well with your system, because you're right, you can't just eat crap and everything else because it does affect you negatively. Except for donuts, I'm just playing. But with donuts, with me, if I stop in all seriousness, if you start to look at that and what you're taking in and what you're putting out, you start to realize this self-responsibility. And as an empath, you are one of the strongest people here, not one of the weakest. We walk around like we're weak, like we can't, like how the hell I can't function in the world now, and there's no catastrophes and the sky isn't falling and everybody's got electricity and blah blah blah, and I'm having a hard time functioning. How does that ever get any better? And
Right.
that's the mentality. You're thinking, gosh, if the world ever really went bad, I would collapse. Like I would just crawl into a ball and disappear, right? And it's so not true, because the energy is different, and that's when you will be called. You, dude, or if you're an empath and hearing this, man, you are uber strong. You do have superpowers, and you were
Yeah.
given this as a gift. It's out of grace. It's not one mistake. You're not broken. It doesn't matter that you got cut on from trauma or not. It doesn't matter what the stimulus was. What matters, I'm saying that in a relative picture. I'm not saying that in absolute. I'm saying in relevant to what I'm discussing in context is that's great. You understand that, but the reality is, it was designed to get your breaker to cut on. It was just enough to get the power in you, right? Just for you to say, wait a minute, this is wrong. This is wrong, and I deserve, and there's more to this than what I've experienced, right? And that's that moment we're talking about between the first and the second step of, I recognize I have problems. I recognize that I had trauma. I recognize that these were my opposing forces. I recognize that these things happen to me. But ultimately, how do I turn that energy into something that doesn't bog me down, but actually helps to lift me? And in lifting me, meaning the dude, yourself, you will lift everyone else around you. And that to
Yeah.
me is the key. And empaths, and I'm telling you, coming from a family of empaths, in an idyllic scenario, yeah, man, having a bunch of empaths in your house sounds great. I gotta tell you, I got people with power. I live with three other energy sensitives, man, and I gotta tell you, we all have big power. And man, it's crazy when you walk through the house and you're able, somebody, this is my child, and they're saying, Dad, got to shift that energy, baby. You know what I'm saying? You really, you start going, and I'm walking next to my child and saying, hey, sweetie, you gotta rethink that energy you're putting out right now. So I'll say that to you because, man, you talking about being constantly aware. It definitely shows you and highlights some of your limitations. Let me tell you, and some definitely practice needs. Holy moly, um, it's a daily. It's a daily reminder that, man, I'm walking through the world, and even though I think I'm being quiet, even though I think I'm hiding, I'm shielding you from my deep hurt inside from what just happened last night, and I'm getting through my job or whatever today. What you're not realizing, man, is you're still vibing that negative one out. Even though you are trying to hide it, even though you are trying to not share it with other people, bring them down, do it, it's still coming out, and it affects everyone. Um, and I'm not putting like a big guilt trip on everybody, but I am saying, man, you were here not for your job. You were here not for your next car or for the vacation or for whatever that experience was. You were here because your soul has to ascend this place. That's why you are here, is to do something to ascend this place. And part of your ascension is helping others to ascend. Because I've learned a lot from Kristin. And who will be another way shower for me? Who will I be a way shower for? We're all that for each other. And sometimes we hang out for long periods of time, and sometimes we just, scoot by in a couple of conversations or in an elevator. And all of those things that come into your orbit matter. And when we were talking about being a seer, Kristin, it's about, you're able to tap in a way that's special. And sometimes as an empath, you're able to tap into somebody and understand 15 years of pain and sorrow and other things. But I'm focusing on that for a minute because that's what we usually take and make us feel bad. But you're able to tap in a moment. In 3 minutes, you can now get all of this history for the person, which means that gives you insight, which means you're able to share with them because you understand where they're coming from. That's a gift, because you didn't have to go live it yourself to have a real knowing understanding. And the problem is that that's not like I get to choose it with you, Kristin, or just somebody else. The problem is, as an empath, we walk around and we're doing that with everything and everyone, and we don't realize. And then even though we started out the day feeling great, and we end the day feeling kind of depleted or whatever, and we don't realize we've taken all this stuff on, in that way. So I guess from my perspective with all of that, it's to me, it comes down ultimately to, at what point do you want to feel better? At what point do you believe that, you are and have something special to share? And that's shared through you. I'm not saying you being the dude, but shared through you. And that to me is what we're all here for. And as an empath, even more so in a lot of ways, because you are tapped in a way that, the average guy isn't.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge point that I try to make is, if you're in stage one, and especially if you did have a significant amount of emotional, physical, psychological trauma, Even the trauma of being an empath. You said something about being sensitive, knowing somebody's saying something that's not true to them, but having them do it, say, oh, I love being around this person, and you can feel they don't as a child. That's a trauma in of itself. We have to understand that that's really traumatic. That's psychologically confusing. That starts to break down, like it becomes like a psychosomatic split where like we can't trust our intuition, we can't trust our own bodies, and so I
It's
think we
true.
have to redefine trauma, because a lot of people are like, oh, well, I wasn't beaten to death by my parents, so I didn't have trauma. It's like, being a physical human at this stage in humans human history is traumatic, even in and of itself. To be
Mhm.
super sensitive in this world can be a trauma in and of itself, so we have to become aware of it. So first you look at that, you identify that. I'm not sure if I said this yet, but I think, with you, we were talking about with teachings. It's like when you find a teaching that resonates with you, go with that. Because it's like calculus might be a terrible teaching for a preschooler, but the calculus is not trash and the preschooler is not trash. Neither of them in and of themselves is useless, but they're just not the right teaching. So usually when it's something you already passed, you're kind of bored. It doesn't, it doesn't feel like juicy to you. When it's not something you're quite to yet, it feels
Mhm.
overwhelming, almost agitating, maybe even
Mhm.
angry.
Mhm.
So just know. But then when it's like right there and it resonates, then go with that. So I just feel like that's a prerequisite to say, like, whatever advice you and I are giving are from different perspectives and from our own experience, and everybody has to be intuitive within themselves and figure out, like, okay, what am I ready for now? But the second stage, or just for empaths in general, one of the things that you mentioned, kind of, through what you were saying, I feel like it's this, is that we have to realize that we were not meant to like, the whole reason we're here is to be strong powerhouses in a new paradigm of beingness, living, and whatever that is for you. We did not come here to fit this world's criteria. If you keep doing that, you will
That's
feel
right.
crazy, you will feel
That's
like you
right.
don't belong. Stop doing it. Like,
That's
please
exactly right.
get new friends, get new hobbies, do things that feel great. Yes, my whole world had to break down. I had to find new romantic type of partners who could understand who I am now. I had to find new friends. I had to find total new ways of being. I bet you my lifestyle would be completely abnormal to the average person. I have to understand that I am sensitive, like you said, kind of a filter for all
Right.
sorts of stuff.
That's
Like,
exactly right.
I cannot overwhelm myself. I cannot like, this world is overstimulated. We're totally bulldozing ourselves. We're not feeling into our sensitivity. If you try to do that, you will break down. You're not
Mhm.
meant to conform to this world. But you can, uh, another point you said that was really important. Part of being an empath, I think, is when we have all this trauma and we're super sensitive, we can really disassociate. That's like our go-to addiction. I
Mhm.
mean, empaths usually have a bunch of addictions, let's be honest, that they have to work through. Like, it's very common for them to have some sort of addiction. But just to cope with this life, right? Because it's not easy.
Yeah.
All right. I was just like, if I still keep talking, like, can you even hear me? Okay. So,
No, you.
so yeah, we spend a lot of time in our upper chakras. We disassociate. So I think this is also another important thing is, second step, don't conform to the world. Also, part of the second stage of awakening is, be here. Make the conscious decision to be fully embodied in this physical life, because that's a
Mhm.
huge problem with empaths. Like, we feel so sensitive that we keep pulling our energy out of our body, pulling our energy out of your body. If you need to, get a really good somatic therapist, because sometimes we do have so much trauma in the body. You called it the pain body earlier,
Mhm.
that when
Mhm.
we try to move back in, it's like there's too much trauma, there's too much pain. If that's the case for
Mhm.
you, because if I
Mhm.
mean, I work with people and it's more common than you'd think, just tons of physical and sexual abuse by their family,
Mhm. Mhm.
tons. So if that was you, like, really consider getting a lot of help for that, because your body might not. So I don't want you to think that this is such a trite, like easy breezy, just get back into your
No,
body. This might be a
of course not.
whole, for,
Yeah,
right, for whoever I'm talking to,
that's right.
depending, it might be a whole different thing. So if you have a lot of trauma, you might have to do a few months with a somatic therapist, and I would highly recommend that. Actually, I
Hmm.
had tremendous problems coming back into my body. I mean, it was something I worked on for quite a long time. My nervous system was all out of whack. I had to learn how to stay regulated in my body and feel safe in my body.
Hmm.
But making the conscious choice that I'm going to be alive as a human being and not keep escaping into the ethers. Now, the interesting thing is, and I'm sure you'll like, because you're nodding your head, and I think we're like on the same wavelength here, is when you do that, your spiritual gifts usually skyrocket. The more I am grounded, I'm here, I'm actually physically present in my body, I actually have much more connection to break channeling in like energy, you know? So, I mean, I think those are really key important
Like,
points, that it's time to use that superpower and really up the ante. So those are, I mean, because we talked about like, hey, let's give practical advice, like,
hmm,
you
hmm,
know, things that are grounding, um, to get back in your body, making it a real choice to say like, I'm not a victim of being an empath. I
hmm.
might have been victimized by certain things, but being an empath in and of itself was a beautiful decision. We are kind of like warriors in and of ourselves, and of why we're here. The world is meant to learn from our stance of saying, I'm not going to conform to these nonsensical GMO,
Hmm.
toxic, whatever, grueling 9 to 5 jobs that we hate, and we're just dying, our souls are dying inside. We're
That's right.
supposed to put up, yeah, we're supposed to put up like a full stop, no thank you. And the world's supposed to be like, wow, all right, well, maybe we should rethink some of the things we're doing. Right. So I mean, I think that like we want to take it to the next level, start
Hmm.
doing those things and really become masterful at your own spiritual gifts. Like if you find yourself to be a seer like David, you have those kind of abilities, and start to like become, I say in this stage, become more sensitive. Like then allow yourself to actually choose when to become more sensitive. Oh, the other thing I have to
Right.
say, practical tips I find is empaths have terrible boundaries. And as somebody who works as a coach and has studied a lot of psychology, and I'm just like, this is just a basic thing, guys. Like, in fact, I think a lot of people have terrible boundaries, to be honest. But we don't need some fictitious, like you said, imaginary, like thing protecting us. We need to have solid boundaries. That means, who am I? What do I like? What I don't like? If I don't like something, say no, thank you to that thing. Stop doing it.
Right.
Stop participating in it.
That's right.
Um, I don't think we should have walls. A lot of people put up walls, and that's like, that just means they shut people out. And then never tell them why, but like, let's have strong boundaries. I mean, I have even a whole course that I teach people how to have boundaries, because it's so important. So yeah, like once you've gotten stabilized and you've worked through some of the really hard stuff, if that's you and you need to
Hmm.
like kind of go
Hmm.
back into that experience and heal some of those wounds, I mean, the next steps are very practical, very empowering. Let's get stronger boundaries, move back into your body, make a commitment to this life, and start realizing like you're not meant to conform to this world. Like, and I have a next step after that too, but that's just like a second step you
Yeah,
know
let's stay here because people need to know. It's you brought up a great point. The commitment to being here. You have to find your reason for being here, and it has to resonate for you. And obviously, it's very different for everyone. And so I really like that point you're making, because that's really is part of the second thing, which is you have to find your reason to be here, and be okay with being here and what you see and what you're experiencing. And because once you shift your perspective, you'll learn that, if you're a one and you're going to experience some two things and some, let's say, negative one things, but you're going to average out as a one. But when you work on yourself, when you're able to drop some of these rings, um, address some of the traumas, address some of these deep hurts, right? When you do that, and you drop these rings off, you find that, oh, now I'm a two. And you're able to see, you're not bending space and time. And yeah, you still feel crummy some days, but you're a two as you approach life, which means that you're feeling now some three things and some one things instead of negative one things. So now
Yeah.
even your bad, even your negative is not as negative, because everything comes up. Your positive goes up and your negative comes up with it, because you're floating in that wave, right? And for most of us as empaths, the wave looks like this. I hope you can see that on screen or not, but like a big huge wave. I'm super super happy. Oh, I feel like, and you're just killing yourself. So what we want to do with practice, what we want to do is bring these lines closer. You're always going to have a wave. We live in an energy. We are energy. We are a wave function. So you're always going to be this. We just don't want that, because that means that you're like trapped in crazy man. But when you come down to here and you stay within that wave curve, now all of a sudden life is meaningful. The cool part is that it's not pain anymore. So now when you experience stuff in that, you experience a negative one, when you're hovering at a one or a two, you see it as information, but you're witnessing it. It's information, but it's different than being pain. You experiencing the pain of, participating in the pain of. And,
I
the
like even
suggestions
the
you
way
brought up
you
in stage two.
describe things. I was gonna say, even the way you describe things are more like linear, and you're using numbers. You have a little bit more of that masculine approach, but I like that. But I do get the idea, and I think I just want to add to, because this is
Yeah,
important. What you're saying highlights that I forgot to mention is we do think of things linearly, and then, but unfortunately, life doesn't actually work that way. It is much more cyclical. So even when I'm talking about the stages, they're not like something you stay in stage one and you move to stage two. And these are just ways I'm just trying
it's
to like
this, right?
explain it. Right. It's like, I mean, but you're right. It stays more even keel. And even the other day, I had something that brought me right back to something that happened in my childhood. It was extremely painful. I had to I chose to sit with it. I worked through
Mm-hmm.
it. I had the tools. And I was able to go really deep, really fast, and move out the other side of it. And that's what happens when we have these like tools.
Yes.
Several years ago, 2 years ago, like 6 months ago, it would have looked different. And so I just want everyone to know, like, I mean, sometimes something like that would have taken me like weeks to recover, days to recover. So it's okay. Whatever, because we get really shame based, right? Like if we're not doing it X, Y, and Z, we're doing it wrong. And it's not that. You just have to know where you're at, honor where you're at. I'm never like, oh, well, I've gotten to this place, so I can't go back to a feeling. Sometimes I've got to go back to stage one and be with that
Right.
child self that felt really victimized by it, get in it all the way, let it transform, and then move on, right? So it does. Sometimes we pop back and forth, but I realize what you're saying, because it is. It's like, because you were saying you could be like a two, and then every once in a while feel a negative one, and I was like, that's exactly what I was, thinking about the cycles. But
That's
you said
right.
just said it in a different way, and that's really important to say, because I think people will get so shame based of like, oh, well, I
That's
should be at
totally
this
true.
level, I should be feeling this way, or if I am feeling this way, I should definitely not feel it that way anymore. It's just like we just kind of have to
That's
be with what is.
well, and that's so cool, because I'm working with people like on, when you're talking about practice, and you're saying, people have a hard time, as with meditation, right? It's always meditation, and you get this BS about monkey mind and all this other stuff. Monkey mind's great. It'll, all of that works out well, but people seem to think that it has to become a ritualized, and religious experience. Every day at 3:45 p.m., I've got to go and meditate, and if I don't do 20 minutes or 30 minutes, I'm an ass, and I failed my purpose. No, dude, your spiritual practice, a meditation is you come out here at sunrise and drink a cup of coffee and watch the sun come up. Welcome to your meditation, man. You had a hot dog and French fries with your kid because they had a huge smile on their face, and you haven't done it. That's
Yeah.
a meditation, right? You things that make you stay. If you look at it and say, okay, if you believe in this concept I'm sharing with you, just to intellectualize it so you can imagine it and say, okay, I'm in this wave, and so a one is my low point, and a three is my high point. So I average a two. I'm a two guy. two things happen to me. I attract two-ness. Negative twos, not so much, because you can't, as long as I don't come down, you can't play in my space. So it doesn't affect the same way. It doesn't mean negative twos don't come in your space. It just means that I call it ascension energy. It means you're able to witness it, but you're not participating in it, So very different. So, it's that's your objective here. And so because I'm not challenged by this particular issue that you're challenged by, that allows me to see it as, because I've already worked through it in myself, that allows me to see it from a different perspective. I'm just saying as one human to another. I'm not talking about any of your roles here. I'm just saying one human to another. It's a different perspective. So now I'm able to provide guidance. I could have leadership. I could just my beingness. In other words, I don't have to say a word to you. And maybe in my beingness, it helps to lift you and make you shift differently. I don't know if people are aware of this, but you think about crossword puzzles. And they did this test about crossword puzzles where everybody's having a hard time solving this crossword puzzle. And then one dude in the UK solved it. And then shortly thereafter, because he solved it, everybody else solved it very rapidly. And it was because it got
like the
into the
4-minute
collective,
mile.
right?
Yeah.
Right? So think about that, and you think, wow, man, the power of that. So as an empath, I think to wrap all this up in a huge spiritual burrito between me and Kristin and the whole restaurant here, I think understanding, first of all, that you're not broken. You may have gotten knocked down. You may have to dust yourself off. You may have gotten hurt, but you're not broken. There's a big difference in that. And I work with a lot of people who think they're broken, and it pains me because you're not broken. And what you are is filled with pain, some of yours and some of not yours. And to understand the difference of what you can claim and what you don't have to claim is a big step. And then, on the things that you have to claim, the things that you're struggling with, in claiming those is where this practice helps you and removes those triggers, right? And as an empath, unfortunately, we claim a lot more than that's ours. So that's our problem. And that's a problem we have to undo, right? We undo that problem. And we undo that with understanding and love, putting out love, even when you don't feel it. You're not feeling it, and you're not sure where it's coming from you. And it's not that you have to feel love out. It means that you have to change yourself and say, well, how can I bring love to this situation? And I find that that's the biggest. That's better than shielding. That's better than anything. Energy responds. I think we've all seen that video of, I can't think of his name, Japanese guy, right? Where it talks about words and you can see words with water crystals. Have you seen that? Kristin,
Yeah, Dr. Emoto.
Yes, right? Same thing, right? Like, this power, right? And if you said a negative word, the F word, jaggedy crystals, right? And you say something with like love or something positive, and it creates this nice little other shape, right? Very interesting stuff going on. And we're made up, 70-80% of water, right? So you think about these things and the intention. It's not just the word, but it's the word, the spirit of that brings with the word and the energy of that. So, as an empath, I guess on my end, Chris and I would wrap it up just to say, look, there's a point where you have to get out of victimhood. There's a point where you have to understand that you were given a superpower. You were given superpowers, not because you suck, but because you're awesome, because you're strong, because you deserve it, because somehow, some way, previously, you matter enough to where you're given an extra sensory perception of this place. You're more than you. You were given more, and you've got to somehow figure out how to make it work with your other five senses. And so, this is born out of grace, not as a penalty. And I viewed a lot, because I didn't understand it, all the incongruence, and it was very disruptive. And now with understanding, you're able to say, wow, you still have your moments always, but you're able to say now it's not a world view of negativity. It's able to see the negative and be able to say, hey, it exists. And how do we affect a change here? How do we transmute the negative? Working together. That's why Kristin, I think, is here with me today, is to share, not because we are, Dalai Lama Jr., but because, right? But because, there's some practical things through experience and channeling and through, a shared message here of love and also intent of, dude, there's just so much more here than you're tapping into, and it's available to you. And it's really what your job is supposed to be here for. that is your job and it's there for you, and I feel very, much gratitude to you, Kristen, for hanging with me and having this chat and sharing. I think a lot of great points you brought up, a lot of nice ways to view what's going on, and particularly a different way to communicate than me too. So I really, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for that and what you bring to the table and every day, and just, hanging out here with me. I hope you're open to doing this again and continuing the conversation in some other areas too, I hope.
Yeah, thanks, David. Absolutely, because I'm pretty sure you and I could probably talk on these subjects for like 12 hours straight. And even as we're talking, like, oh my gosh, and I could talk about that and this, and that's why I try to make as much content as possible when something arises, and I'm like, oh, this would be really helpful to share. And before we wrap up, I mean, just closing from me, I think that is why I do what I do. Is it does break my heart that there are these highly sensitive, spiritually gifted people out there that are so stuck in the trap of their own pain and the trauma, which is understandable. I want to make this clear. I find it to be very understandable within the world that we live in. But you're so, if you're watching this at home, like, you're so needed. And so that's my personal mission, to try to get people out of that loop and stuck to in the empowered, awakened empath, to, even beyond that, where maybe you don't even really think about being an empath all that much, because to be
Mhm.
honest, you're in harmony with the choices you're making, and you're living your life's purpose, and having an impact and impression on the world. Your energy is moving out to everyone instead of being collapsed in and of ourselves, right? Which is usually where we're at when we're first in that painful empty state. So yeah, that's my mission, and I would love to do any more conversations about this. This was lots of fun, and it's I was saying before, it's like nice. I'm so grateful that you reached out, because it's nice to not just be the one woman show over here talking in, to the camera by myself. It's lovely to have a discussion, and I'm very much open to more of this.
Awesome. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, and we'll definitely do this again. And I really love what you had to say. I think so many will too. And thank you. Yeah. So until next time, right?